As you look up, you notice something about the statue. There are some odd indentations on the king's chest piece. Something with great kinetic energy seems to have impacted the cuirass, around where the heart is. A bullet? Someone shot him in the heart. Interesting.
Okay, I can't see it, but I take your word for it. Well, Martinez is riddled with bullet holes. This place saw a lot of action during the revolution. But the statue is recently renovated, so maybe a joke? Target practice or a political statement? If we connect every bullet hole in Martinez to the murder, we'll get an overwhelming amount of loose threads. But then again, we don't really know what we are dealing with here, so... I've made a note. Don't hold your breath.
The king stands high above you, surveying the bay, neat and indifferent to your sightings.
Even by the standards of the Philippian kings, old sumptuous Philip was known for his profligacy. Well, he blew through the whole national treasury, starting the decline of one of the penultimate century's greatest superpowers, the suzerain of Revachol. His own maladministration foreshadowed the fall of the monarchy. During the anti-centennial revolution, an end to his family line and the monarchy on the Insulindian Isola. Stories have it that he had his bedroom converted into a treasure chamber, where he stored unfathomable wealth. Krugerrands, bars of gold, ornate weaponry, armor, and various chalices. He called it the Sol Auron. It was obscene. There were whispers he slept on a huge pile of gold-dipped feathers, like some obese dragon, instead of a bed, like a normal person.
The man certainly knew how to live!
Your synapses flash. Yup, that's the stuff.
I assure you, they drove quite the hard bargain for this space. But you're right. I am a bourgeois woman, and this is my long, incredibly lightweight, interminably bourgeois boat. I believe the official title is Senior Labour Negotiator. In practice, I'm a grocery clerk. I relay the union's demands to Wild Pines and return with Wild Pines' counteroffer.
And how are the talks going?
They're not. That's the problem. The union stopped all negotiations a week ago, after that awful lynching took place. Now they won't even let me into the harbour. There's a 2-meter-20 racist behemoth blocking the gates. Let's say I was not making the kind of progress I'd hoped for when I first arrived.
And when did you first arrive?
I arrived 3 weeks ago. Yes, in the middle of February. The bay was still partially frozen then. I prefer to do these things on site, like the RCM.
But the strike began in December.
I wasn't the original negotiator here. I took over after Mr. Gaumont hit a wall with Mr. Clare, the union boss. Mr. Clare refused to speak with Gaumont despite concessions he'd granted the union in prior negotiations.
This isn't the first time the union has gone on strike?
Heavens no. There have been 2 prior strikes. Both times the union won significant concessions, including overtime pay and a medical plan. This time their demands are more, I guess you could say, aggressive.
Ludicrous even. It's meant.
Mr. Clare told him to... how did he put it? Fuck off, midget. Gaumont is short of stature, you see. Yes. Keep in mind, this is a negotiator Mr. Clare has worked with before, and who was more than fair with him and the union. There are leaflets everywhere, and banners. What did they say again? Oh yes. Every worker, a member of the board. Then you might also like their other slogan. Demand democracy. Personally, I agree. It lacks the pizzazzo of every worker a member of the board. It's quite simple, you see. Every time the Wild Pines group makes a decision, about what? About anything really, it needs the signature of each of the 2,200 workers in its Martinez terminal. Just so you understand, this is but one of 22 terminals owned by Wild Pines. Essentially, not only are they kings of the company, they are also kings of the 72,000 employees of Wild Pines Group. They're having a blast. But how can they afford it? After 4 months, my assumption was they would prefer a more practical solution. I'm not sure. Naturally, I assume that was just their opening position, a hard-nosed tactic with a side of mockery. But there's been no follow-up, just the same nonsensical slogan repeated over and over again. And now, people are getting lynched, I hear. Behind the whirling in rags. A disastrous situation if there ever was one.
Excuse me, from whom did you hear about this lynching?
I first heard it from the bowyer at the gates. The one whose very name advertises his aversion to work. I think he said it was, "Call me mañana."
This checks out.
The scabs? You mean the huddled masses of Jamrock, come to plead for work where the union refuses to?
Don't let her answer it herself.
To answer your question, yes, they were organized by Wild Pines. The contractors picked them up from Jamrock and drove them over. This is standard practice. The company reserves the right to man its stations. Everard Clare is a man of the utmost integrity. If you can say one thing about him, it's that he always puts the interests of the workers first. Of course not. Everard is fantastically corrupt. I imagine he has a thick, viscous goo where you and I have blood. He is the most corrupt individual I have ever seen, and I deal with men like him for a living. If there is anyone more venal, more irredeemably nepotistic, then it's his twin brother, Edgar. Yes, Edgar looks exactly like his brother, except for that lazy eye. He also talks exactly like Everard does, and when one's term as foreman is up, the other takes over. It's how they circumvent the term limits, you see, with a funny little switcheroo. While in office, they've embezzled God knows how much of their workers' dues. The Débardeurs Union was once a perfectly normal institution. 20 years ago, anyway. It must not have been easy to establish under the Emergency Act, but they did it. I can respect that. Organised labour at its best, as they say. Then something happened in the local chapter elections. The brothers Clare came and transformed it into a... how do you say?
A mob. The Débardeurs are a crime syndicate. Sad as it may be, I suspect we'll be forced to cooperate with them.
Refreshingly honest, officer. The company has tried appeasing in the past, but I'm afraid our concessions have only emboldened Everard and his brother. And your opinion, Detective, if I may ask? I'm a curious and talkative person, you see. Would you say the Débardeurs Union is... Indeed, and a hungry one. Sadly, Wild Pines have cooperated with what amounts to a crime syndicate for 2 decades. However much you feed the leech always hungers. I'm glad you asked. There was a woman, the previous forewoman of the Union. She disappeared.
Disappeared?
Yes. On the last day of the local chapter elections, her daughter phoned in and said she wasn't running anymore, or coming to work. Ever. End of story.
This forewoman, Her name?
Sadly, the company records do not even give a name. She's just forewoman in private correspondence, Holly. I don't even know if it's a sir or given name, and I don't have access to the union's files. Indeed, the company suspects foul play, but there's nothing they could do. It was a union matter. The point of the presentation is, these kinds of things happen around the Clares. Watch out when you're dealing with him.
Thank you for your concern, ma'am. We'll be just fine.
She nods slowly.
Yes, and perform autoerotic asphyxiation on yourself with your funny necktie! Out in the open somewhere!
She lets out an unrestrained laugh, the crow's feet stretching onto her cheeks. Six kilometers southwest, in the Valley of Dogs, Junior Officer Chad Tilbrook takes aim at a rabid black dog licking its wounds in the grass. To his left, his partner, Emil Mullins, whispers, "You heard what happened to Tequila Sunset in Martinez?" "Yes, he lost his mind," Tilbrook answers, fingers on the trigger. "Don't worry, Emil." He pulls it out slowly. Slowly now. He'll find it again. We always do.
You? You're an officer of the RCM. Preciso Mundo. Nothing more nor less than the de facto law enforcement body of post-revolutionary Revachol, Detective.
Yes, we are the Revachol Citizens Militia.
Welcome to reality, baby.
What is all of this? The scent, the sound, the air.
What world? The only one, I suppose. The world of matter. And its pale antipode.
The camera of her mind glides over the surface of the water.
Great bodies of water. Forest-covered surfaces. Clusters of light where the cities lie. You've seen the montage. We all have. This world is enough. There is a term of endearment they coined for it in the DeLorean century, when humanity was high on this world, discovering more and more of it, these archipelagos included. Elysium. It does. There are those who would call it hell. A term of hatred that originates, like many such things, with the Mesk petro-fascists. Oh, you want a picture of the world? There is no complete set yet, dear. They're having some trouble reaching orbit. Great things are difficult to achieve. For now, we're viewing the world from the inside, sideways. We used to think it was a sphere, but that is beginning to look less and less likely by the day. You wouldn't know it from the tabloids, but the ORG nations have been launching weather balloons into the lower ionosphere since the 30s.
ORG, Occident Revachol Grad.
There's a steadily increasing trickle of images. Between the big three scientific contributors, they're piecing together a dark grey corona. Yes. Pale covers 72% of the surface. There are grey flares and prominences, even arcs above entire isolas. The images are blurry, but if there was a sphere in there, it certainly looks like it fractured a long time ago.
A cold fear seeps into you.
They say there is a rarefied envelope of matter surrounding the darkened disk of our planet. That is, if we are still living on a planet. Or, to speak more plainly, imagine vast swathes of land disrupted by nothingness. I am sorry, dear. It must sound quite terrifying through the acute encephalopathy. Even scientific positivism isn't entirely convinced about what we're dealing with here. But this is one of the greatest questions of our time. Maybe when they get the complete set together, it will jolt us out of our rut, bring us together, however naive it may sound. I don't know about things of that scale. My expertise lies in nations and trade routes, one or several layers below everything. But yes, we'll be fine. Don't worry.
She does not seem convinced that you'll be fine. If anything, she's realizing how deep your condition runs.
You may have misimagined it. I don't have the power to convey to you the effect and geometry of the images that depict our world from below low orbit. It's like the crowning of the world. It's insane. Very disco. You'd love it. See? Everyone finds something worth holding on to in this world, however wasted its opportunities.
The cold seeps into you. The air is heavy with 80% humidity. Suddenly, you're conscious of yourself standing there, on whatever this all is. Your arms hang down by your sides. The lieutenant observes you both, silently. He adjusts his glasses.
The Pale is not, technically speaking, part of reality.
Yes. Also, I think we've had enough excitement for today. Remember, we have a cadaver to attend to.
Of course, Lieutenant. Let's try something else. I don't think your colleague would appreciate that. He has already been so patient with this whole exercise. Let's continue with something else, all right? You can ask about anything else in the world. Anything.
You could sneak back later when the lieutenant is not here, unless you can convince him to step aside. Good idea. Just ask him. He won't make a scene.
Fine.
See? What can he do? You're a grown man.
Are you sure you're sure? Your colleague seemed adamant. Okay. The Pale is the most dominant geological feature of the world, Detective. The separative tissue between the islas. It is the inter-islary mass. Isla is a Messinian word for a continent of matter, enveloped on all sides by the Pale. Also, isolation, or landmass. We used to believe there was only one. In the last 4 centuries, we have discovered 7. Windy, Seol, Samara, Ilmara, Grad, Katla, and this, Insulinde. An oceanic isla. It comprises mostly of water. Muindi is the largest, Katla the coldest, Insulinde the bluest. What can I say? Each is perishing and dear. Achromatic, odorless, featureless. The Pale is the enemy of matter and life. It is not like any other, or anything in the world. It is the transition state of being into nothingness. No, Detective. We're safe. It begins there, 6,000 kilometers to the north, and even more to the south, east, and west. You are in the middle of the Isla.
As your gaze instinctively turns north, a small black pit opens up in your stomach.
Yes. That is enough. Many cities are built much closer. An uproar of matter, darling. Rising into the pale. Rolling. Evaporating even. A great vision. The area of transition between the world and the pale is called porch collapse. Imagine a grey coronal mist, cold vapour marked by spores of an opportunistic microorganism, a mould that's adapted to grow at the edge of the unrest. It's the most disco thing you will ever see. It's difficult to describe, or even measure. Something whose fundamental property is the suspension of properties. Physical, epistemological, linguistic. The further into pale you travel, the steeper the degree of suspension, right down to the mathematical. Numbers stop working. No one has yet passed the number barrier. It may be impossible. Oh, it is so difficult for us.
A squall of birds, hardware operating in the harbour, firm, self-evident.
It is possible to force dimensions on the pale. In modern times, we can even compress its latitude, bouncing radio waves from one end to the other, shortening the path. But it is still hard for humans to navigate the pale without getting lost, or having our minds damaged. Extensively. Some say the damage stems from extreme sensory deprivation. Others argue that pale somehow consists of past information that's degrading, that it's rarefied past, not rarefied matter. They call it the blend over of the self. The pale does not only suspend the laws of physics, but also the laws of psychology, maybe history even. The human mind becomes over-radiated by past.
Who says and who argues?
The logical positivists say, the dialectical materialists argue. It feels terrible. Absolutely terrible. International standards strictly limit civilian travellers to 6 days of pale exposure per year.
It's more for her. Way more.
No, nameless detective of the Citizens Militia. I am a member of the Entreprenetic Business Class. I'm cleared and trained for 22 days of pale transit annually.
Someone else you've met may have been exposed as well. The strange grey-haired woman in her lorry.
Yes, carried in the hulls of airships. It's a horrific job. Automation will abolish it soon.
You should ask the pal driver about this. See what she says. That poor woman must have stories to tell, like you wouldn't imagine. She's looking out toward the sea. What at? It's hard to say. She's over-radiated, and then some.
Entreprenetics is the scientific study of the pale, or a recent iteration of it by way of grad. The study of the pale reaches back 6,000 years. The Pericarnassians called it the Western Plain.
They had not travelled the entire circumference of the Pericarnassian super-Isola. It was not merely in the west, it was everywhere, even then. surrounding them.
There are signs of pre-modern crossings. Successful navigation of the Pale relies not just on technical know-how, but intensive psychological preparation. Some of these tactics have been known for thousands of years. Nothing. We remain powerless before the Pale. The only real advance in Pale transit is the speed with which an aerostatic craft can pierce it. Less exposure leads to less effects later. Hybrid airships, Detective. Conventional rotors or jet engines no longer add velocity after the point of reference for motion is suspended, once you've crossed from near Pale to far Pale. In essence, we throw them in and they come out the other end, if we throw them precisely. Then they don't.
Gone, like a skipping stone beneath the surface.
The Pale outweighs reality 2 to 1. There is more Pale than there is matter, and the ratio is slipping. What do you think, Detective? Precisely. One of the few measurable effects of the Pale is that it is expanding at an unknown rate. An intuitive conclusion of that development is that one day the Pale will cover everything. But this sort of talk is mostly left to extremists. Most people, and indeed most private and government sector organizations, entire civilizations and religions even, find handy ways to ignore or downplay that knowledge. I suggest you do the same. Yes, sweet reality. But before we do, tell me, Detective, is this the first time you're hearing this? Do you really not remember anything? Beyond curious. Tell me, what do you think of the Pale? You really didn't know. This does not spell good for the investigation, Detective. If you don't know even this, then... I hope so. I truly do. If I may suggest, hold on to your colleague, Kitsuragi. I ran a check on him and he is very competent. In the meanwhile, you have me. I will assist you in any way I can, even if we have to do it one basic term at a time.
Good. You have not passed out from it. Perhaps I worried for nothing. Are we still on the reality lowdown, or should we do actual police work now?
Good luck, detectives.